Deep divisions over immigration, religion, economy, and societal reforms have left France on the brink of implosion. This raises pressing questions about France's future, its place in the world, and its identity. But what is behind all this? And does it signify the impending collapse of this once great European power? Welcome to Living History. To understand the challenges facing France today, we must look back to the mid-20th century, when post-war Europe underwent seismic transformations. France's major cities, including Paris, Lyon, and Marseille, were at the forefront of these changes, as industrialization and urbanization swept across the continent. There is, however, more to this story, as at the same time, France also grappled with the far-reaching consequences of decolonization, as its former colonies gained independence. With this, the groundwork was being laid for a perfect storm. You see, at the height during the 1920s and 1930s, the French Empire sprawled over 13 million square kilometers, representing 8.6% of the world's landmass. It was an era when France was a colonial titan, with its dominions home to 110 million people, about 5% of the world's population at that time. It was second only to the British Empire. However, the end of World War II marked the beginning of the end for the French colonial empire. The war had weakened France's ability to maintain its overseas territories, and waves of anti-colonial sentiment swept across the globe. Decolonization saw the emergence of new nations from French control, beginning with Lebanon and Syria in 1943, and accelerating with the tumultuous departure from Vietnam in 1954. And a brutal war leading to Algeria's independence in 1962. As these territories gained sovereignty, a human mosaic began to flow towards the French mainland. Migrants from former colonies, some seeking economic opportunities, others fleeing political turmoil, poured into the metropolitan heart of their old empire. At the same time, mass migration from rural areas in France to urban centers fueled rapid urban expansion. To alleviate overcrowding, the French government initiated ambitious suburban development projects in the 1960s, creating what we now know as the banlieues. These suburban communities were initially conceived as a panacea, offering societal housing, schools, medical facilities, and public transportation networks. Yet an unintended shift began to take place. As the French citizens who had initially populated the banlieues sought greener pastures in more affluent neighborhoods, a void was left in their wake. This void was rapidly filled by immigrant populations, many of whom traced their origins to, you guessed it, former French colonies. Thus began the transformation of these suburbs into cultural melting pots, where immigrant communities sought to establish new lives. However, the trajectory of the banlieue took a grim turn with the onset of deindustrialization in the 1970s. Major French cities, particularly Paris and Marseille, witnessed the shuttering of factories and the disappearance of job opportunities. The promise of economic prosperity that had lured people to the banlieue began to wither away. Consequently, a cycle of despair, marked by unemployment, discrimination, school dropouts, and poverty, took root and thrived. Over time, the banlieue evolved into cultural enclaves where residents maintained strong connections to their countries of origin. The result? Integration with French society remained elusive for many, even as successive French governments have tried to grapple with the task. Adding fuel to the fire, in recent years, the banlieues witnessed the arrival of new immigrant groups, such as those from Pakistan, Syria, or Afghanistan. Needless to say, the confluence of rigid cultural norms, linguistic barriers, and the isolation inherent in ghetto environments created a volatile mix that set the stage for more social tensions and upheaval. The banlieues are today a microcosm of France's multifaceted challenges. They are a breeding ground for social and economic inequality, extremism, and political polarization. They are also a stark reminder of the country's unfinished reckoning with its colonial past. And despite the French government's substantial investments, exceeding 60 billion euros in renovating housing blocks, upgrading infrastructure, and improving facilities in the banlieues, the challenges persisted. High unemployment rates, school failures, and poverty continued to cast long shadows over these communities. Importantly, the banlieues continue to be characterized by a disproportionately high number of children growing up in poverty. This, though, is only the starting point for many of France's current woes. As France's troubled suburbs have long struggled with social problems, the French police have been granted sweeping powers, including the right to use intermediate weapons, stop and search individuals without suspicion, and use lethal force against drivers fleeing checkpoints. These measures, intended to maintain order and security, have backfired spectacularly. They have led to a string of high-profile incidents of police brutality, including the fatal shooting of 17-year-old Nahel Merzouk in June 2023. This sparked violent protests, during which vehicles were set on fire, properties damaged, and police stations attacked. The police responded to these protests with arguably excessive force, making over 4,000 arrests and engaging in racial profiling and other forms of police brutality. This further eroded trust in law enforcement among banlieue residents. Compounding the problem, polls have shown that a significant number of police officers sympathize with far-right political parties that advocate for even tougher law enforcement measures. Police unions have also inflamed tensions with inflammatory rhetoric, portraying the banlieues as war zones and banlieue residents as hordes of savages. Which brings us to the topic of France's current political turmoil. The recent spate of violence in France has provided fertile ground for the far right to seize upon public discontent and advance its nationalist agenda. Marine Le Pen, the leader of the nationalist rally, has proposed a number of draconian measures in response to the crisis, including the trial of young offenders as adults, the withdrawal of state support for convicted individuals, a surge in incarceration rates, and a curtailment of social benefits to residents of the banlieue. Le Pen's stance has resonated significantly with a substantial segment of the French populace, resulting in a marked surge in her political influence. This shift towards the far right is a profound development with profound historical significance. The interwar period saw the rise of groups like Action Française, which promoted nationalist and monarchist ideals. The collaborationist Vichy regime during World War II further underscored the far-right's willingness to align with authoritarian regimes such as Nazi Germany. In the post-World War II era, figures like Jean-Marie Le Pen and his National Front, now the National Rally, gained prominence, championing anti-immigrant rhetoric and opposing European integration. Their skepticism towards the EU was rooted in the belief in national sovereignty and rejection of supranational authority. More recently, President Macron's economic policies, which have favored the wealthy and exacerbated social inequality, have also contributed to the rise of the far right. Macron's perceived elitism and his failure to address the concerns of ordinary people have alienated many voters who see Le Pen as an outsider who can shake up the system. While Le Pen's rise is often attributed to current crises, such as the economic downturn of 2008 and the migration waves of 2015, it is also part of a broader trend of reactionary retrenchment in French political life. Le Pen's political narrative, while modern in its expression, is deeply rooted in France's historical alliances with the far right, each time challenging the Republic's principles and its place in the modern world. Furthermore, the resurgence of far-right movements in France challenges the EU's cohesion and decision-making processes on critical issues like immigration and security. As one of the EU's founding members, France's political landscape significantly influences the Union's policies and direction. Crucially, France's problems are far from unique. Similar issues concerning immigration and integration reverberate across the European continent, manifesting themselves in Sweden, Belgium, and Germany, among others. If you want to find out more about the challenges France's biggest neighbor, Germany, is facing, check out our next video linked here. See you there.